As most of us know, Disney villains are the spice that brings those films to life, something I have talked about a lot on this channel. And I believe with that understanding that it is officially time to create the rankings amongst those who stand out as the baddest of all time. Now, like my previous ranking of the live action remakes, I will have to lay down some ground rules, where despite saying every villain in this title, this will only apply to the main ones I find predominantly throughout the films. This is a case where I'm excluding villains like Chernabog, who despite being a threatening villain featured in multiple Disney media, he is a part of Fantasia that has no overarching story, where there is no hero in that particular story, or too short to actually be derived from, as most of the sound is coming from the orchestra of classical films that was used to animate what they figured music conveys. I will also exclude Pinocchio for the most part, because they are too short to even be remotely the primary villains of this story, as it more focuses on the test of his spirit and becoming a real boy and not on the villains. The same can be said for the Ringmaster and Dumbo, as humans don't play a big role in the film or the other characters overall. And in modern times, I will not count Namaari, even though I categorized her as a villain before, but the film seemingly doesn't want to actually play with that definition, being listed as the secondary one who gets redeemed and will be excluded in that conversation as well. So to categorize villains, we must actually focus on the bigger stories with heroes and main villains in that particular video. The focus is on Disney animation and not Pixar. I will plan that later if I have the time in the future, where I also plan to do separate videos on why I like each individual villain and why they are great, so look forward to that in the future. And also, fair warning, I also forgot Home on the Range existed while recording this video, and I want to watch that film again because it's horrible in my opinion, and I'm just going to move on. And just keep in mind, most of these will be short, as there isn't much to go off of them because there are so many, and I particularly do not have a connection to those stories as a whole, so just be mindful if those seem too short for you in this ranking. So without further ado, let us begin. You know, I like Big Hero 6, but I cannot stand the fact that they had Professor Callahan as the villain of this film. Nothing he does at the beginning really suggests that he should be the main source of conflict, where all of a sudden he becomes one because of how the perceived villain made a mistake that made him lose his daughter. Like, everyone now knows that infamous line that he made about that was his mistake that they added that really didn't actually make sense at all from where he started and how Tadashi was his top student. Like, that hampers any sense of understanding for his actions at this point in time to actually commit to a stupid revenge plot, and Disney's necessity for in this era for twist villainy. Like, there isn't really much I want to say about his character because it is completely boring and lacking any real depth to the motivations in this stage of his life, where, like I said before, only the series made him forgive his actions about Tadashi, but that isn't something everyone watched, is it, Disney? You know, he wouldn't be the worst villain if I included Ralph or Vanellope in this list, because they are far more villains than he ever was in that terrible sequel, but he just is because his actions are completely stupid and unwarranted for what happened in the film. Here we continue to point out the terrible twist villainy that Disney has produced in Dawn Bellwether, being only introduced as the villain toward the last 10 minutes of the entire movie. Like, nobody actually remembers her because of this action, where of course you know the main characters of the film but not the main villain of this story. It's just that forgettable. The only thing I really want to point out here is because of this twist is where we notice Disney started to reduce the role of the villain to be non-existent. Like, in this case, I don't find anything else appealing about what she did, and even in this ranking, I'm forgetting what the hell she was even talking about here in these scenes. Maybe predator supremacy or something like that. Like, that's just how forgettable any of this really is, and we should just move on from her stupid ass character. And here we come to ground zero of Disney's twist villain era for one of the most successful modern films, being one of the most stupidest villains I have ever seen produced in Prince Hans. The only reason he's higher on this list is because he has more of a prominent role in the movie, and that's about it, where his motivations are completely dumb and all of his plans are completely dumb. Like I said previously, even if he succeeded, there was no way he could be sure to save Arendelle or becoming king by that extent, where he has no bloodline or relation to the throne, or even sure that killing Elsa would actually end the winter or even prolong it for eternity. I mean, if that happened, he would surely be executed, where I think there was no way you could actually derive his villainy up to the point helping people or whatnot, even if that was part of his plan. Like, there was no suggestion that he would be the villain, or his plan like he originally wanted to marry into the throne where he wouldn't become ruler unless somebody passed. Like, it would only work if he actually married into it rather than Elsa and Anna dying. Otherwise, he would have no say in it because he became petty since he was last in line to the throne in his own home because he has 12 have older brothers or something. Like, really guys? Is this the best you could come up with a villain after you made Elsa good? Like, is there anything else you could do to the story to make a villain out of this? Like, we all know they were trying to do that with the Duke, but they ended up making them such a minor character whose villainy lasts for 5 minutes before being sent back home being petty and whatnot. Like, that is just stupid. Like, they had it, but they just refused to commit it to any way, hence why I'm bunching him up with Hans, because this movie somehow could not involve him in the plot that wasn't mainly about them to begin with. Like, everything about Hans is totally awful. The 1-2 switcheroo of twist villainy that just doesn't work for them. The Rescuers is one of those underrated classics that came out at a time that Disney was expecting a downfall in animation. But the villain, Madame Medusa, of this particular film wasn't really great in my opinion. At her core, I describe her as a watered down version of Cruella de Vil, chasing after something to fulfill her own personal desire and looks in the case of Diamonds here. Like, she does kinda look the part and acts the part that is similar in vein. Yes, she displays some really heinous actions like kidnapping and manipulating a young girl, but frankly beyond that, she gets defeated by a bunch of mice, the thing she fears most about in her life, or kind of leave her on this cliffhanger surrounded by alligators where I just don't really care much about her, which is just serviceable enough for the plot, but just an overall forgettable villain in the case of the previous ones that I've already mentioned. There isn't really much to say about Edgar Balthazar from the Aristocats, because I don't care for him particularly in this overall film, because while arrogant and greedy, he just does display those traits of clumsy idiot, and that's virtually it. I hardly pay attention to him because the main movie's focus is on the cats instead, where that's why there's not much to say about him as a whole and this era of older Disney films. You know, I was debating about where to put Radcliffe on this list because of my childhood memories of loving all the Renaissance films, but then again, Pocahontas has truly become one of the weakest films of this era by far, and Governor Radcliffe is the weakest in that regard as well. And that is disappointing because I love hearing David Ogden Stiers and all of the Disney films he was a part of, where he was almost like in all the Renaissance era films and Lilo and Stitch as Jumba, where it is true what they say that he is just a boring villain and nothing else, once again reflecting the feeling of the film overall. A pompous ass who does fuck all for most of the movie, where all he cares about is the gold of Virginia and the good graces of King James. Like, literally, he's that delusional and that mediocre of a villain. And like others say, the only thing he just really cares about is just gold, 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 and no connection to anyone else. I mean, I like that the villain does not care about anything else but himself, but not to the extent where he just puts his men's life in danger and doesn't even get fully punished for his actions and xenophobic attitudes, because the sequel actually showed us the case that he was scot-free serving the king yet again after he was put in chains by the guys back in this film until he was fired at the end of that other film. Like, it just feels like nothing matters in the case of him as a villain, and I truly see why he should be valued this far down the list. And yeah, the movie doesn't really matter as a whole, with the sequel just making this adventure pointless and obsolete, so yeah, that's understandable why Pocahontas sucks. Yeah, in this case, I guess it's another forgettable character and film and overall in The Fox and Hound with Amos Slade, where this guy really isn't overall a bad guy, where most of the stuff he does just relates to not seeing hunting as a bad thing. Most of it is just derived from being mainly old and cranky, but still leagues above the other previous ones on this list. Like, at the end of the film, he does feel the remorse for Todd and chooses not to shoot him because of how he saved him from a big bear, where his defeat is just derived from having a bad ankle. So not particularly good overall for a grand villain, but not bad enough to be remotely stupid or overly boring, hence why this ranking belongs right here to my emotional attachments to the film. Now, Robin Hood has plenty of villains in it, but of course, the number one spot always goes to Prince John, the younger brother of King Richard. I did like how the film portrayed them all in animal form to differentiate in that Disney style, but I really wasn't fully sold on him being a great villain or even caring about this film overall. And I derive most of this because he is a coward who sucks his thumb a lot. Like in the Radcliffe situation, I really don't think he does much other than stay in high places and do nothing most of the time. I do like him more to his cowardly persona, however, being high and mighty as a rich royal where everything else just gets torn down for him at the end. Now, like I said in my live action rankings, Lady and the Tramp is another so-and-so movie for me. Not bad, but not good enough my opinion, and neither is the main villain in that regard, Aunt Sarah. A villain for the main characters because she loves cats and hates dogs. Basically just a cat lady. In the case similar to Emma Slade, she's not fully villainous in personality, but a main obstacle in the entire plot for Lady and the Tramp, hence why I want to rank her a little bit higher. She isn't really seen for predominantly in the film because the focus is on the dogs, showing humans mainly waist down instead, but her actions animation still punished the main characters for many misunderstandings where she makes it up at the very end. Basically something to cap off the less notable characters of these films I don't hold in high regard in my opinion. The reason why she's even on here despite being a more of an anti-heroine as described by the wiki is because she is listed as the official Disney villains in the category on Wikipedia. I think it's become more apparently obvious in this list that the more less notable or older the villain is, the more lower and shorter I will rank them on here. And of course there is a good reason for it, for not having the connection that most have to the stories because of how large the collection of the films has become a generational differences and whatnot, like in the case of Madam Mim being higher because of her design and personality being more standoutish in this list of older villains and less notable Disney films. She is a great contrast to Merlin in the film being a witch with similar magical powers and generally is a fun villain who can turn into a dragon and amongst other things like the other great ones, where I just personally rank her lower due to my connections to the age of this film and the tone of the film being overall filmed in an era where Disney style was mainly focused in live films like Mary Poppins and of course Disneyland. But I still admit outside of the main ones we still hold dear, she does stand out indeed, hence her ranking right here. Now, Oliver and Company stands out as a great film in the Dark Age just before the Renaissance era, where the villain does stand out a lot more in Bill Sikes like in the past. He is described as brutal, shadowy, sarcastic, psychotic, impatient, uncaring, eerily charming, evil, cruel, slightly naive, cunning, opportunistic, murderous, ruthless, greedy, and sadistic. Basically all the traits of a stereotypical Disney villain, hence why he's placed high on an era of films we hardly look back upon very much. He is a mob boss that Disney actually portrays as threatening, where he does go out in an epic way with that train scene, hence why I rank him here on this list for that fact based alone in the final act of the film. Everything else is just pretty standard for the movie he's in and not much to go on, but he is a pretty threatening villain in that regard. Despite not being my favorite in any way and not appearing for the majority of the film like Jumba and Pleakley, Gantu is placed it on this list mainly because of how much I love Lilo and Stitch and of course being a primary antagonist throughout most of the sequels and the series other than Hamsterfield of course, who is the real main one of the franchise but not in this conversation of the film. He is just another villain that is more by the book following the rules rather than evil primarily, just doing his job for whoever he works for, where he is a figure of great size and is a little bit sadistic in some cases, getting annoyed easily, or beyond that he is just a standard soldier that you would see, posing the main characters and nothing more beyond that for the rest of his run. Now, the Horn King stands out as the greatest villains of the Disney Dark Age, something more threatening as an opposing force than what Disney had did before, taking that dark aspects to its fullest extent. The villain being evil for the sake of, well, being evil, where his appearance could be that of the devil or the Grim Reaper. Even though I sing his praises often in previous videos, there isn't much to show to his full story that he belongs such high up on those classics for the time, despite being mostly mediocre, where he was a great way into re-ushering that terrifying villains for Disney to have. I just wish there was just a lot more to explore to him and added on to his character rather than what we got in this film to show how much of he is a threat that he could become and a figure that scares most of the children when they first see him throughout the course of the film. Shan Yu is definitely the second weakest villain of the Disney Renaissance era. It's just that he's not as compelling as the others, but still much better than other previous ones that I have listed on this ranking. He is like the other previous two as a big opposing threat to the main character who has very ruthless traits and is cold-hearted himself. But what makes him unique is how he's trained to live off the earth, possessing heightened senses, a trained Saker Falcon named Hayabusa as his pet, where his strength is mainly demonstrated many times throughout the course of the film, such as easily breaking down a barricaded door or effortlessly slicing through a massive pillar with his own sword, making him easily one of the strongest characters in the film and of course villains as a whole, where his abilities allow him to manage to capture the Emperor despite having most of his army wiped out by Mulan, where he finally gets defeated by her exploding into a bunch of fireworks. And of course, one of the greater traits I like to add to his character is how he doesn't care at the fact that Mulan was a girl as the one who actually wiped out most of his army as the soldier from the mountains, probably respecting Mulan's skills in other areas rather than brute force as his own. Like all Disney sequels, The Rescuers Down Under isn't that very good, but at least compared to the modern ones, it actually had a real villain in Percival McLeach, who I found to be more threatening to Madame Medusa in this very franchise of films. He's a villainous poacher who has no qualms about killing animals or capturing the main boy of the film, being sadistic enough to almost feed him to the crocodiles. He is an excellent hunter and tracker, and despite only having a 3rd grade education, he is very intelligent, cunning, able to lie and cheat effectively, and also tossing Cody's backpack back into water so that he will be presumed to have been eaten by crocodiles. He also has a crude sense of humor, and I really liked his death scene where his own pet Joanna waved goodbye to him as he fell down the waterfall after his short-lived cheers. Other than that, there isn't really much else to go on in a mid-sequel as you can basically get. Meet the Robinsons hold a special place in my heart, being the film that most people still don't appreciate as much today. A film that really centered on my love of being a futurist and waiting for the wonders that waits us in the future. And that's why I rate Mike Yagubian up on this list for having the background of complete misunderstanding as a villain. Because at first we see a shady guy hellbent on destroying one kid's future, where we later see that it is his former roommate who got jealous of what he did eventually that got Lewis to be a prolific inventor in life, while in his case he slept and missed the catching a ball that costed his team a game and sent him on a spiral of depression. Something that just filled his heart with anger and darkness and resentment, where he just feels like the whole world hated him for that single mistake, even though that wasn't the case in the entire film.
Hey Goob, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
And of course, through that, he found something great within another failed invention of Wilbur's being Doris, who is more considered to be the primary antagonist overall because of what she does, but is still mainly a robot invention who doesn't talk, who of course was made to assist people but turned evil and becoming the master, teaming up with Mike and using him for that purpose to change the future, where she controls everyone and everything, which of course shocks and puts a fear in Mike, who only wanted to ruin his future rather than everyone else's just to feel good about himself. Seeing the extent of his actions when Wilbur shows him around, feeling remorse, and finally redeemed when Lewis actually changes the future in the present, leading him to have a happy future instead. But of course, he's just not on High's list for the reasons of this era of film, but still overall, I liked his character in that regard and the arc he went through. Now this is the part where the list becomes much more interesting in villains to me, starting off with underrated classics of Atlantis. Lyle Tiberius Rourke is the actual definition of Disney's perfect twist villain that they really missed, and it clearly shows that, giving him more time to breathe in regards to the events of the film. There are more hints given to its character and his figure of authority, giving that to him as a villain, where they wanted the character to have more complexity by not making him inherently evil in the past, but just rather greedy. The idea that they wanted a three-dimensional character as opposed to a two-dimensional villain, where he was extremely manipulative, scheming, cruel, violent, and having no qualms against harming or threatening others to get what he wanted, as he planned to steal the heart of Atlantis to sell for a high price and didn't even care if Atlantis would die as a result. He shows his intelligence on numerous occasions to get what he wants at the cost of others so he can fulfill his goals in life, where at the very end he doesn't get that and loses his sanity just trying to kill Milo in order to fulfill that very purpose, where finally it results in his very doom getting slashed and transformed because of his heart exploding into those small tiny crystals. Overall, he is a great villain representing the conflict of what certain sides see in the film for a place that doesn't exist like Atlantis. Like, he's just perfect for what the film tried to present, with the crew being the heart of what this film represents. Now this is where we start to getting more into established Disney characters, an iconic character that most fans know of what in regards to Lady Tremaine. Unlike more of the famous villains, she is the one who doesn't have powers and cares more about herself and her daughters. Because of this attitude, she cares not for Cinderella, being her stepdaughter because of how beautiful she is compared to her own family, using that for her own purpose to live off well while making her work for a living. Mainly, she is abusive to her at every turn to humiliate her at her own will, whose sinister glare really sells the point of villainy towards her very character, making false promises to her and ruining her hopes at all turns. Just a straight up bitch as you can get. I don't break her high because I normally don't care about her for most of the time amongst other villains, and that hideous hairstyle is just something I do not want to see, and I want it out of my face, where I preferred Cate Blanchett's look overall to sell something more realistic in that regard. And of course, at the very end, it becomes satisfying to watch her lose with that sinister grim look on her face to settle in how her abusive ways are now over as she finally gets to live happily ever after. For one of the greatest films of this era in the Dark Age, it truly has one of the greatest villains of that very era in Ratigan. Words cannot express how much I love the fact he was voiced by Vincent Price, giving so much to the role just being too much in his own personality. His reputation as the world's greatest criminal mind is backed by an impressive track record, as several of his schemes have actually saw success only matched by his rival in Basil, failing to upend both each other, creating this great rivalry to flourish. A truly cruel and sadistic megalomaniac, Ratigan is genius is solely driven by power and the desire to earn himself riches, where he acknowledges his crimes as being immoral and takes pride in his wicked acts, which he acknowledges as being evil, making him a truly sadistic and heartless being who cannot stand being called a rat. Everything about him just loves to go the extra mile, and it's why I appreciate him more than the others of this weird wacky era of animation. I just don't rank him as high because of my own personal favoritism towards the iconic ones, as you will see. While appreciating Snow White, you cannot overlook the evil queen. I don't think she is quite as interesting as many others, but for what the film accomplished in animation, I think she deserves a high spot like this one. Her plans are relatively weak and stupid when you think about it, but then you still overlook it for the film that it was supposed to be with its contributions to animation as a whole. It's so great to just have her caught up in her stupid ego that she becomes ugly and eventually tries to kill Snow White by disguising herself that way and giving her an apple in order to become the fairest of them all. She just represents this desire for wanting more than what others have, looking down upon them, not caring about them but herself and her own well-being, where that actually becomes the death of her, caring too much while getting caught up while the dwarves eventually see her, eventually becoming the first villain to fall to her death, dying the way she didn't want to be, being ugly and not the fairest of them all, where Snow White gets restored to life eventually. It is just the part of what this film did for animation overall that makes it as high as it is, and I respect it for that, but not as much as the other villains eventually. Cruella is another iconic villain that we know of that has like 10 other films about her in Disney when you count the live action films. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but she really deserves this ranking because of her cruelty towards puppies in the pursuit of fashion. Like literally she decides to skin puppies because of their fine fur up compared to adult dogs, where she is also one of the wealthiest Disney characters ever, where because of that she's very rude and spoiled, barging into places unannounced to get what she wants to see, not caring for the well-being of other animals in the process. Cruella is known to be short-tempered, where she gets annoyed with Jasper and Horace's foolishness and throws a tantrum when things don't go her way. One of the great things about her is how her anger seems to be a problem, as it makes her reckless and impulsive, as she drove her car recklessly after chasing after Dalmatians but ended up crashing her car into a ravine, adding more to her psychotic personality that makes her stand out as a villain going in after something so pure known as puppies, hence why she's ranked high in this list, but also low because she's going after puppies. Initially, Clayton just appears to be a simple bodyguard and nothing more, a chivalrous gentleman albeit with a fragile temper and an intolerance for treating African expedition as a vacation experience rather than a business endeavor, where his more notorious intentions are that of selling gorillas for his own personal gain. The thing I like about him is how he starts as civilized but gradually gets worse later on, evident by his paranoia in the jungle, keeping his shotgun to his side to remind him of what he is compared to the savages of the jungle that he's in. His situation is where he'd rather be with civilization rather than the wild, and that becomes more apparent when he descends into madness. And this is why I rank him high, because of his own death scene being one of the darkest that Disney has produced, done to symbolize him becoming the thing he hates the most as a savage chasing after Tarzan, who actually becomes more civilized in this moment trying to save him, that resulted in his own demise, hanged for what he had become, being the savage of the jungle. There's just a lot to appreciate in this story for how he shows a lack of humanity over time. One of the greater elements of the original Jungle Book movie is Shere Khan himself. He is a very suave and very charming for a tiger, possessing a strong sense of regal pride and elegance that allowed him to rule. Of course, the way of that is how most people do think of him as Scar Light, and that is very noticeable in his character. He speaks rather politely, even to potential victims with a soft tone, though he interjects with subtly condescending comments as well, where he just seems to be fond of taunting everything, and mostly taunting his prey until he's ready to make the killing strike. He is also known for holding a deep hatred for that of mankind and what we are capable of, as seen evident by looking up Mankind, where you understand that in his hatred of Mowgli, the fear he instills into other animals to make him trust him more than that of mankind, who tears down their ways of life as we know, until the very end of the film where Mowgli proves otherwise, where the perspective on him actually finally changes him to be humiliated in the end. I rank him higher on here because of his hatred of humans and that of his charming attitude. There is nothing more iconic than having one of the most explosive Disney villains in the Queen of Hearts. Her bombastic attitude is what makes her stand out, screaming off with their heads at what she doesn't like. She represents the height of the insanity in Wonderland, very egotistical and very childish and psychotic to the fullest extent. Her mood swings are what makes her stand out more in this ranking, displaying various emotions that showcases to Alice the madness that she has found herself in. But sometimes she also pulls me out because of the way she is, especially is screaming her head off every time. Captain Hook is a phenomenal Disney villain to Peter Pan in every way, and I really see why he is such an iconic of such Disney villains. He acts menacing in his pursuit of a boy who never grew up, where on the inside he is very emotionally vulnerable, whose relationship with Smee really elevates him as a villain for having a friend he can trust compared to the rest of the crew. He is also a very murderous character, where at one point in the film, he callously shot and killed one of his crew members because of how annoying his singing was, just spiteful of anything he hates just to go in his own way. He is extremely intelligent and manipulative, aided by the fact of his charming and suave personality. He is able to trick anyone, even those who are more aware that he is not to be trusted, or he is just one of those all-around characters that you understand why we hold him dear in modern pop culture for many years. It is just once again his relationship with Mr. Smee that really holds him together, that's something other Disney villains don't have, and his relationship with animals too is very great. And there's just so many scenes that just make you laugh at him, and how he just is a great representative of the standard Disney villains that most boys probably look to if they want to feel bad and like a pirate in that case, long before the likes of Captain Jack Sparrow, of course. I mean, what can I say? I love Pat Carroll's performance as Ursula whenever she appeared, and Poor Unfortunate Souls is one of the best Disney villain songs, and yeah, that's how much I actually feel about her. It is surprising how she had voiced the character from her very first appearance until her death recently back in 2022. A stunning dedication and love for the role herself that I very much appreciate. She is a bargainer of the worst kind, dedicating to get what she wants, as most people look down on her for what she was questing over the power of 7 seas. As a result, she only helps to agree Poor Unfortunate Souls if it benefits her, and it shows when she causes Ariel to lose her voice as a human to interact with that world, and using that to her advantage to manipulate and hypnotize Eric using Ariel's voice to get what she wants out of the king eventually, as we see. There's also just so much to love about her character as a villain and why she is iconic as is. What she has done in this very film has defined modern Disney villainy as a whole that we've seen follow through, away from the modern Disney villains of course, that of course most of us grew up knowing throughout villainy, where without a doubt, without her, we wouldn't have seen the same impact on this genre of characters as a whole, and that's why I appreciate her for that reason. She has one of the best traits of villains, being highly intelligent but also extremely arrogant, that results in her demise being easily killed by Eric from being impaled from her ginormous size, thus ending her short rule as Queen of the Seas and inadvertently causing the happy ending that Ariel longed for at the very start of the film. But I don't rank her higher because of my love of these other characters. As with everything in Treasure Planet, Long John Silver is highly underrated for what he represents in the film. I consider him to be one of the most sympathetic out of all of them, and it really shows with the relationship he has with Jim not being fully evil by the end of it all. Yes, for the most part his motivations are to find the lost treasure and being greedy for his crew, but his intentions are more honorable than you think. For the most part, he actually planned a mutiny to happen after they found the treasure as a respect to avoid much bloodshed as possible, and of course caring for people like Jim. The fact he is a cyborg rather than having a peg leg and eye patch really adds to his character and what his relationship to Jim really is, because we know in the film Jim's background is how his father left him, and how his relationship with John actually becomes the heart of the film more than you realize, being this father-son dynamic where you see this get tested during the path of villainy in the film, refusing to shoot him and finally saving him at the very end beyond the treasure itself. And at the very end, when escaping beyond the consequences of his crimes, he shares one final moment with Jim, giving a heartwarming goodbye for what they went through, and enough gems to actually rebuild the end at the very end of the film. Everything about that reflects on the relationship, hence why he deserves to be number 11 on this list for what he represents for many people in that relationship that makes him just more than a villain but a father to a hero. I mean, words cannot describe how much I appreciate Keith David's voice and what he did with Facilier. I mean, his voice really adds to the character on so many levels, being driven by mostly greed and the desire to have authority over others, more specifically over the citizens of New Orleans. As Naveen mentions, Facilier is indeed suave, very smooth talking, polite, and often charming, aiding him in luring unsuspecting villains into his lair, combining the best traits of previous villains like Shere Khan and Ursula in that regard. It's just that he's very smooth, and he's got the skills to prove it in voodoo magic and his talent as a dancer and whatnot. He has no qualms about terrorizing innocent civilians as a means to fulfill his goals, and often relies on manipulation and false promises to achieve such goals, not above killing his own victims. Once their usefulness has been fulfilled, he murders them. His murderous state is shown when Ray, the Firefly, interferes with his plot, where the witch doctor quickly resorted to murder to prevent any interference and appeared nonchalant about the very matter, crushing him like a little bug that you would see, and everything about him comes comes out of spite for the rich, being relating to that of the poor, to get what he wants out of his life in that regard. And though he gives off the impression of being totally in control of every situation, in reality, he lives in constant fear, unable to repay his debt to his friends on the other side. When the notion of failure comes into play, Basilier becomes vulnerable, desperate, and high-strung. We see this at the very end when Tiana breaks the amulet, letting the spirits come back to him for not paying back his debt, being dragged back to the depths of voodoo hell for all eternity to suffer the consequences. A cool end with his face plastered in fear for what he robbed others of in his own life. Everything deserved of a modern Disney villain, and one of the best ones of these recent era of the last 2D animated ones. I think it's more of a surprise myself when I added Mother Gothel this high, but she is one of the best modern Disney villains for what she did to keep Rapunzel herself. I mean, the style and the way she is, her singing and voice really adds to the character who wants to extend her beauty for all of eternity. Because at the very start, we see someone who is old and on the verge of death, wanting to restore her own beauty by this very flower, virtually becoming immortal, and when that is taken away, she acts out of no choice but to kidnap the daughter of the king and queen to restore that and keep that, manipulating and raising Rapunzel as her own after they use that flower to heal her mother and herself. Everything she does feels at first caring in Rapunzel's case of the fear of the outside world and as a mother protecting her daughter, but is done to extend her youth and life on this plane as much as possible. Anytime she mentions going out in the world, she gets shot down to stay in one place, not allowing her to escape until Flynn Rider actually comes into view, and then she has to use her skills to continue manipulating her about his ways and whatnot until the very end when he is on the verge of death, cutting her hair to save her and ending her immortality, finally causing her death, slowly disintegrating while falling out into dust before she hits the ground. A perfect representation of someone being greedy and in it for themselves, representing older Disney villains combined into the new. The reason why I'm putting 8.5 on this list is because I totally forgot King Candy to write when I was writing any of this down, and I feel awful about that because I was so tired during writing this script and actually filming this video that I immediately forgot about that, and I apologize. So I'm putting him right here on this ranking above Mother Gothel because that's where I think he belongs right now. So in that regard, in the case of Turbo and King Candy, he is one of the most impeccable modern twist villains of Disney yet. Everything he does is out of acting out of survival mechanism. How we know his popularity waned when a new game actually came in, and how he actually destroyed that, and how he actually created this sentiment amongst other gamers about what not to do, as that will unplug your game. But as we turn out, he actually disguised himself as King Candy and manipulated a new game to actually star in it, another racing game that's made for little girls and whatnot, and usurping the original user in Vanellope, of course, and making everyone forget about her or virtually make fun of her being a glitch, which is actually her superpowers. In all of this chaos, he tries to manipulate people constantly to get what he wants, but almost fails as a result when his world comes crashing down, where we see that entire facade fail and he becomes the greedy monster he truly is after being the best that he could ever be. And that's not there. Even when he gets eaten by a bug, he transforms into a new form, grateful at any chance to be transcending the normal game form he's actually disguised himself, now having new multiple powers to actually defeat Ralph in the situation. But of course, the same actual programming in the bugs actually caused him to actually get attracted to the light that all bugs were attracted to, and virtually gets this satisfying end to a villain that is just so awesome in all ways, and unforgivable that the entire sequel forgot about him. Like seriously, you guys suck. Maleficent. The most well-known Disney villain, the queen of all of them herself, where she really represents the highs of what it means to be such a villain, being petty and powerful as we see. A fairy who cares for his status in society, angered at not being invited to the birth of the king's daughter, casting a curse out of spite for that very fact to when she turned 16, depriving them of their very happiness they found in her daughter. Maleficent represents pure evil. She is ruthless, dark, devious, and will do whatever it takes to achieve her goals. Additionally, she is very sinister, which is shown when she taunts Prince Philip after she captures him, where she has one of the most iconic villain lines in all of Disney history. Maleficent is also soft-spoken, proper and elegant, and only has two possible motivations for her crimes, either out of pride considering she curses Aurora because Stefan didn't invite her to the christening, or she simply is a monster who enjoys being evil, being one of the most powerful Disney villains ever, described as all the powers of hell, where her voice really captures what you think of an evil witch or an heiress with such power that would scare the hell out of you. She just embodies the point of what being a Disney villain really is, and I appreciate what they did back then with her very character, surpassing the original Evil Queen in every way. In this part in Moana, I'm blending both in Te Kā and Tamatoa in that argument because of what they do in the film and what they represent. Or in the case of Te Kā, it is just her cursed Te Fiti that Maui caused, and Moana has to restore her, representing herself actually in her face, healing the land, and the final climax of what we learned in the story, but also mainly the focus on Tamatoa being iconic as is. I mean, I really understand his hype as a character and what he does, also having one of the greatest Disney villain songs in Shiny after Poor Unfortunate Souls. I mean, his role is smaller than many I ranked lower on this list, but everything he did in those scenes is truly breathtaking as a villain, and of course being aware of breaking the fourth wall in several moments. It just really adds to the unserious tone of having a big ass crab in your film in a journey that just represents that of my ancestors in all of Polynesia. Just really great that this film can have something different for its villains that still stands out, and I understand about why someone in particular likes this crab a lot more than I realize is worth loving. It's just that he just exudes this fun personality and everything about him is just so great. And every day somehow when I think of Disney movies, I always get stuck with the first line of Shiny being, well, Tamatoa hasn't always been this glam for some reason, and I really hate it. I mean, I love him and I love this line, but I just don't know why, and this has been bugging me on the daily, and Tamatoa is virtually ruining my life in that regard. You know, I really love Yzma as one of the funniest Disney villains we have ever gotten. Her personality in the entire film is everything, and her relationship with Kronk really adds to the role as much as Smee added to Hook. I mean, I gotta hand it to Eartha Kitt. She really gave it her all to the role and added so much expression with her performance that I consider to be one of the greatest of her entire career, where she voiced up until her very death also, really showing what she added to that very role. Other than what you will see I will rank higher in this film, she is one of the funniest villains that they have ever produced, and I love her for it. Everything about her is very expressive, and she goes off other tangents in her monologue pertaining to simple things in life about saving on postage and having such an iconic line that is
Brilliant, 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 I tell you. Genius, I say.
having those traits of greed and power-hungry attitude as others from before is great, but is added on by the fact that she actually has good in her personality, being very eccentric and funny in my opinion. After all, this is just comes out of spite for her being fired by Kuzco, who is the most arrogant Disney character ever created. And once again, mentioning her relationship with Kronk is really great because of how both funny they are and how unaware Kronk is of constantly serving a villain, one who turns out to be a cat as a reference to her role in Catwoman in the infamous Batman series, and just the all-around funny thing that results in her defeat being forced to take a squirrel language class. I mean, it is disappointing we didn't get to see her in the original that had her sing too, which Eartha is really great at singing, but I just really love the comedic touch that adds it, puts her leagues above these others in my opinion, and why I loved her for those reasons in both films and of course the series. Now this is another iconic Disney villain who we all know who is purely narcissistic in style and a sly psychopath. Jafar wears a metaphorical mask of normalcy throughout the film, establishing himself as a cool-headed schemer and gaining the trust of those around him despite his rather untrustworthy physical appearance. Like, his appearance is really great, that really sells you on you should not trust this guy, but everyone else actually does, except for Aladdin and Jasmine. Even with this mask, Jafar's psychopathic tendencies tend to seep in throughout and become apparent to the viewer, particularly in the opening sequence when Jafar, outside immediately initial anger over Gazim not being the one who is the diamond in the rough, displays no remorse in sending him to his death in the Cave of Wonders, simply proclaiming that
Gazim was obviously less than worthy.
Of course delivered in a rather dry tone of voice. It is not until Jafar gains control of the genius lamp that he fully shows the extent of his true colors, becoming arrogant, tyrannical, and ill-tempered with his subjects. He also was depicted as laughing excessively in a deranged manner shortly after banishing Aladdin to the North Pole, suggesting that Jafar was insane and suffering from hysteria. And yes, I pulled that on from the wiki because that is true in the greatest extent as really describing these very characters. His attraction to Jasmine also comes out as very creepy and adds to his villainous personality that makes him a threat in those films, being someone of high power as the Grand Vizier of Agrabah. His lust for power is what really adds to him, making him taking pleasure in abusing others below him, finally adding to his high point of being enslaved as a genie for wanting more than what a man could ever have. He is everything a smooth narcissistic psychopath could ever be, and for that reason, he is one of Disney's greatest foes. And of course, his relationship with Iago is funny at most times up until the very end, where if you had the DVD, their relationship in the lamp is really great among amongst the other things we see in the film. Believe me when I say no one can stand out as a villain like Gaston, because that is the truth. Gaston beyond Jafar is one of the most narcissistic and self-entitled villains that Disney has ever produced, gloating whenever he can of how manly of a man he really is, eating 4 dozen eggs and roughly the size of a barge after the heart of Belle, not understanding her intelligence but is enamored by her beauty to make her his wife. It is really astounding how great of a villain he is, being very chauvinistic, proud, boorish, uncultured, greedy, short-tempered, bad-mannered, narcissistic, and sexist, who somehow has a grip on the townsfolk, revolting against the Beast and his subjects. For the most part, the message shows that he is the real Beast compared to the heart that the Beast actually has as a character. They really did a good job in making him unlikable to the fullest extent, and how you can feel that from beginning to end, being a simple goofball dark who is less than average intelligence to a huge menacing threat to the Beast and the residents of the castle. And pulled from the wiki once again to perfectly view his personality, Gaston's view of women is extremely sexist and misogynistic even by standards of the time when the film takes place. While he appears to be charming to all the other women of the village, such as the Bimbettes, who are a product of the upbringing of the village, growing up to see nothing wrong with Gaston's behavior, memorized by his muscles and handsome face, Belle is the only woman in the entire town being able to see him for what he really is from start to end, and he dislikes him for that. He believes that women like Belle are not supposed to be smart, think for themselves, or get ideas. He even tosses Belle's book into the mud in an attempt to focus more on important things in life, namely himself, where because of this, Gaston's attempts to charm Belle always fail because of his chauvinistic, boorish behavior. His sexism and misogyny is also shown by the fact that he does not even seem to consider the possibility of fathering any daughters, as he states he wants 6 or 7 strapping boys like himself, once again adding to him being very unlikable by anyone. Like literally no one would ever root for a guy who does this under the townsfolk who revere him as a war hero or something, and his death is actually one of the perfect deaths for a Disney villain, falling down with the skull's flash in his eyes to represent his demise, trying to kill the Beast inside, where it was him all along right in front of us. There is nothing more greater than what James Woods actually provided to Hercules in one of the greatest voice acting roles he has ever done with Hades. Everything about Hades captures a smooth attitude about the devil trying to get what he wants, a businessman who we know of daily life, or a politician as figures of modern evil, as he represents that very well. His short temper and comedic attitude is what makes him stand out as great as he really was, and it really shows despite being power hungry to rule Olympus. Yes, nothing about the film is accurate to portray the mythology, but that doesn't really matter for this very story, and Hades truly is the perfect villain in that very case. Hades is generally calm, cool, and collected, but also displays a short temper. Though his machinations are cruel, Hades' informal approach to villainy makes him a widely comedic character with a self-aware and irreverent style of humor, though his jokes are usually played for his own twisted amusement and at the expense of others. However, this is also partially surface level. Hades is eternally bitter and imperious, with his most famous trait being uncontrollable temper. At times, the smallest inconveniences can actually send Hades over the edge, causing extremely fiery fits and extreme damage to the area and the people around him depending on the situation. Hades actually relies on smoozing to get what he wants, more so than his godly powers, acting along the lines of a seedy car salesman or a con artist, which really is better than what we know before of other powerful villains, even though he is powerful himself. Even so, he is an honest god and actually keeps the end of his bargains with every deal, no matter what the stakes are. Additionally, Hades also seems willing to give people second chances, as he constantly gives pain and panic important tasks despite of their constant failures. It's just funny how he is a villain but just really doesn't care or really seem evil with all things considered, and just everyone knows how iconic he is by the clips you see on YouTube and whatnot, where his sassiness is truly everything, and you will not see another Disney character being this sarcastic and sassy in any other way, and he's truly influenced me in how I act around people being sassy and whatnot. Now this is truly one of the most iconic villains of all time in any film. The fact it is a villain who is a family member, being both brother to Mufasa and uncle to Simba, really makes the story stand out a lot more than to expect. Scar, in the case of Hades, is very sarcastic about every situation, and Jeremy Irons really brings that role into a great another voice acting performance, and I really see it. Scar seems to possess somehow of an inferiority complex, as evidenced by his sad resignation to the fact that he was passed over in the gene pool regarding brute strength, and of course the throne. At the same time, however, he is very egotistical and prides himself on his intelligence, saying,
Well, as far as brains go, I got the lion's share.
and is somewhat of a narcissist when he takes over and is self-denial of everything. The fact he is so petty to the length he tries to kill his own family members is a really great addition to being a villain in all the wrong ways possible, but for most of the time he's very insecure about himself and why he wants to be above all in that regard, but failing in the worst way when things don't look good during his supposed rule. Scar is also extremely highly intelligent, as he himself likes to boast, being easily able to manipulate situations and conversations to his advantage, especially in the cases of a young Simba. This makes up for Scar's lack of physical strength, as further demonstrated by his decision to subject a fully grown Simba to a court rather than fighting him openly. Despite this, he did not appear to mind doing his own hunts, as evident when he brought a zebra's leg for the hyenas. He is a fierce fighter who also held his own against bigger and much younger Simba and almost came close to slaughtering him in the end, but everything he does is out of wit rather than strength that his brother and nephew had over him. But of course, in that regard, he fails against the hyenas in the very end. He also saw the hyenas as pawns, trying to use them to overthrow Mufasa, making false promises while revealing his true intentions at the end that causes him to such a demise. Everything he did was used as a means to an end, and really got what he deserved, and for how he treated his own family members and all of the Pride Lands ending up the way that they did. Also, he hates It's a Small World, like a lot of people hate, that really made people relate to him even more for how annoying most people perceive the song, which of course in that case it really isn't. You're just being cowards because of how great it is the more you actually listen to it, and believe me, you're going to listen to it a lot more on my channel as more videos come out. Let's face it, there was no other way I was going to end this list with the true Disney villain out of all of them being Judge Claude Frollo. The most evil, the most heinous, where he believes he is the most righteous. Never has there been a villain like him, and never will Disney ever make another one like him, being the darkest that they've ever produced for all of the right juicy reasons, featuring topics of religion, lust, and genocide. Things that Disney wouldn't even dare discuss anymore or even had before. He is truly the most complex person they have ever created, a religious extremist and a dogmatist, where Frollo is convinced that all his actions are just because they are God's will. He is a cruel and corrupt government official who uses his place in power to meet his own extreme ends, even employing common thugs to enforce his own interpretation of God's will while posing as soldiers. Like, everything he does is similar to many people in real life, and that's what makes him scary, because we know of people who think that way and act that way that he does. And when he does wrong in the eyes of the church, he tries to quickly amend that for such actions like killing an innocent woman and almost drowning her deformed child, which he now has to raise because of the actions against God that he sees in the fear of his eyes. He just fears everything impure on the outside, where he goes against the length of exterminating the entire Romani population in Paris for such heathen ways that are not of what he derives as holy and that of the Lord, committing genocide for what he thinks is right. And as said in the song, he saw corruption everywhere except within, blaming others for his own sin, which each of us are born with either way, no matter what we try to do in our life that is good or holy. This is represented by when he sees Esmeralda, finding and lusting after a girl of extreme beauty that he has never seen before, which sends him into this rage of hellfire, either having her as her own or burning her to rid of this newfound sin. Very dark and predatory as scenes like this, where he's really creepy to the fullest extent, where Hellfire is the best Disney song ever. Never mind Disney villain song, it is just the best Disney song ever, no question, that encapsulates the entire dark tone of the movie that I love, and do not even attempt to debate me on that fact. And what makes him even more threatening is the fact that he has been exterminating these people for 20 years. That makes him the most scary, that he thinks that he is right for everything that is good of the world rather than the sin that he was born with, because of how evil he views the world in his own eyes. I mean, he would even kill every single other villain of this list. Well, not everyone in that regard, but you know what I mean for thinking the way about witchcraft and whatnot, where everyone is just wicked in his very eyes. He is also very manipulative to everyone, a sadist who enjoys torturing for those who failed him, and teaches the wrong lessons to Quasimodo because he is deformed, where he is the monster of the film rather than Quasimodo. He does also show care for him, but that is mostly because he must be in the good graces of the Lord for his actions and nothing more, teaching him that they will see him as a monster and nothing more than that. But when he finally gets the chance to end the nightmare, Quasi actually turns his back from changed by the people he was taught to hate, realizing his own crimes to what he did, finally overpowering him with the fear to save Esmeralda in the process. There's There's just so much about him that I want to explain in more detail than here, so I'll just sum it all up. His actions at the end are deserving of this character being a monster, showing psychopathic tendencies which causes the gargoyle to crack, and versely by extent in spirit being dragged down by hell by none other than God himself, here symbolized by the fire that they cause. A perfect end to a perfect villain, and I couldn't ask for anything better than that. Overall, Disney villains are great and a testament to what provides a good story and what they are solely missing in modern times. Variations of evil that challenges the main heroes of the story and really adds to that. Without them, our childhood would look a lot different and not been impacted by what we see today, as influence for both good and evil. And although number 1 actually should belong to the Walt Disney Company itself, especially those top tier executives, they should still be proud of the accomplishments in characters and stories that they have created for us to share, and I love it. I love them, I love the villains, I love Disney villains, and I will always love them for all time, above and beyond. And with that said, I just truly hope they find their spirit back someday, and I'm all done, so goodbye.